Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into, well, a long life. The longest life maybe ever.
I like it. Right off the bat, piquing our curiosity. I'm ready.
So we're talking about Methuselah, the guy from the book of Genesis who lived for 969 years.
Oh, Methuselah, a name that echoes through time. Definitely a figure worth exploring.
For sure. And we're going to be looking at a text that focuses specifically on Methuselah's life and, naturally, the Bible itself.
Sounds good to me. It'll be interesting to see how those two sources weave together, each offering its own perspective.
Absolutely. Because 969 years, I mean, wow. That's almost an entire millennium. That's longer than a lot of kingdoms and empires lasted.
It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? Imagine the changes he must have witnessed. The rise and fall of civilizations, perhaps even the evolution of languages.
Exactly. If you were alive today, Methuselah would have seen it all. From like the invention of the wheel to the internet, right?
And think about how our own perception of time might shift if we lived that long.
Yeah.
Would we be more patient? Less concerned with, well, deadlines and instant gratification?
Those are some good questions. And the sources we're looking at today, they actually offer some different theories about Methuselah's longevity.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, was his age literal or symbolic? Or was it like some kind of condition of the early earth? Maybe even a divine blessing.
A divine blessing.
That leads us nicely into the next point, I think. Family ties. Because we got to talk about his father, Enoch.
Oh, right. Enoch. Now, he was a righteous dude, wasn't he? Walked with God, they say.
Literally, walked with God and was taken up to heaven instead of dying. Imagine that.
Right. It's like straight out of a myth, transcending the earthly realm because of his piety.
Exactly. And think about the impact that must have had on Methuselah. Talk about growing up in a spiritual household.
Seriously. I mean, can you imagine having a dad like that? Must have been intense. No kidding. And on the other end of the family tree, Methuselah's grandson was Noah, the ark builder.
Wow, talk about a family legacy, right? From Enoch to Noah. And Methuselah right in the middle.
Right at that pivotal moment when, according to the Bible, the world was, shall we say, going downhill.
Yeah.
And facing God's judgment.
So he was like a bridge between these two figures, right? A link between a past that was super close to God and then a future transformed by the flood.
Now, speaking of connections, you know how in the Bible names often have these deeper meanings?
Totally. Like hidden messages.
Exactly. Well, Methuselah, in the Semitic languages, it could mean when he dies, it shall be sent, or his death shall bring.
Whoa. Are you saying his name was like a prophecy?
Well, some scholars think so, especially when you consider that the Bible places the flood in the very year Methuselah died.
So, like, his lifespan was a countdown. That's wild. So we've got this guy who lives for almost 1,000 years, his name possibly predicting a world-altering event.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? About time, about prophecy, about the relationship between humanity and the divine. It's all there wrapped up in this one incredible story.
Amazing. So we know a bit about Methuselah's family and the timing of the flood, but what about the world he lived in? Like, what was going on around him? Was it all good times?
Well, not quite. The Bible paints a pretty vivid picture of Methuselah's era, and let me tell you, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows.
Oh, really? So what was going on?
Well, they describe it as a time of rampant wickedness, violence, a world that had really turned away from God.
Like, specifically, what kind of stuff? Give me the details.
Well, for one, they talk about a focus on material things, possessions and pleasure instead of spiritual values.
Sounds kind of familiar, actually. Like, maybe some things never change.
Right, like a timeless human struggle. But it gets even wilder. They also mention these figures called the Nephilim.
Wait, Nephilim. Those were like giants, right?
Often described that way, yeah. Born from the union of sons of God with human women.
Hold on, sons of God.
Yeah.
Like angels. That's getting a bit mythical.
It's definitely a topic that has sparked a lot of debate. Some say fallen angels, others say powerful human rulers who had gone astray.
Mysterious. But either way, it sounds like they weren't exactly spreading peace and love, right?
Not exactly. They're often portrayed as these destructive forces adding to the chaos and corruption.
So Methuselah's living in this world with all this wickedness going on, these Nephilim running around. Must have been a pretty intense time.
You got that right. And it really makes you think, how did Methuselah navigate all this? What was his life like in the midst of all that?
Yeah, I'm curious to know more about that. But first, I think we need to take a quick break. We'll be back in a flash to continue our deep dive into the life and times of Methuselah. All right, so we're back. And we left off with Methuselah living in this world that's, well, kind of falling apart, right? With all that wickedness going on. But what was his life actually like? Do the sources tell us anything about that?
That's a great question. And, it's funny, the Bible doesn't give us, like, a day-by-day account of his life.
Right, right. It's not Methuselah's diary or anything.
Exactly. But we can still piece things together. We know he had these incredible family connections, his father Enoch having that direct link with God, and then his grandson Noah, who was, well, chosen for a pretty huge task.
Yeah, saving humanity from the flood. So it's like righteousness was a family tradition.
It does seem that way. And that must have shaped Methuselah's worldview somehow, right? I mean, imagine growing up with stories about your dad walking with God.
Seriously. Talk about pressure to live up to the family name. Do you think his faith was strengthened by all the craziness around him? Or maybe even challenged by it?
That's an interesting question. It could have gone either way, right? Did he speak out against the wickedness? Or did he kind of keep his faith private?
I'm also wondering about something else. Living for almost 1,000 years, that's got to do something to your perspective, right?
Yeah. Totally. I mean, seeing generations come and go, maybe he developed a different sense of time, like less worried about the day-to-day stuff.
Maybe he saw the bigger picture, right? The long game.
Exactly. He might have understood the cycles of history, how things ebb and flow, the good times, the bad times. Maybe it all felt, I don't know, less dramatic to him.
It's like he had this cosmic zoom-out feature,
I like that. And this brings us to something really important, too, God's patience. I mean, even with all the wickedness, God let Methuselah live this incredibly long life.
So it was like God was giving humanity a chance.
That's how a lot of people interpret it, like a testament to God's mercy, holding back judgment, even while things were, well, getting pretty messy.
So Methuselah's life, in a way, was a symbol of that patience, right?
Exactly. Although, do you think people back then really noticed? I mean, if they were already ignoring guys like Enoch and Noah.
Probably not. They were probably like, oh, that Methuselah, he's just different.
Right. But here's the thing. Even if his impact wasn't obvious back then, his story still has power, right?
Absolutely. It's a story of faith and endurance, and it speaks to us today, thousands of years later.
And remember how we were talking about his name and how it might be a prophecy?
Oh, yeah. When he dies, it shall be sent. Like the flood was timed to his death.
Right. This idea of a divine countdown, it really makes you think about prophecy and the role individuals play in God's plan.
I mean, did Methuselah know? Was he walking around thinking, okay, when I die, it's all going to hit the fan?
Who knows? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But it raises these awesome questions about free will and destiny,
It's like even in our ordinary lives, we might be part of something much, much bigger.
Exactly. And that mystery, that wonder, it's what keeps these ancient stories alive, I think.
Totally. Speaking of life, remember how we were talking about the parallels between Methuselah's time and today? Like all that materialism and...
Oh, yeah, the scoffing, right, where people basically just ignore warnings. The sources actually bring up some biblical passages that are, well, a little spooky in how relevant they are.
Oh, okay. Let's hear them.
Well, there's 2 Peter 3.3. It talks about how in the last days, scoffers will come, scoffing according to their own desires. Sound familiar?
Yikes. It's like social media in a nutshell, right? People dismissing anything that challenges their worldview.
And then there's Jude 1.8, which warns against people who pervert the grace of our God into sensuality and deny our only Master and Lord, Jesus Christ.
Okay, that's a bit more serious. It's not just about ignoring warnings. It's like twisting faith to suit your own selfish desires.
Right. And the sources point out that this was happening in Methuselah's time, too. People doing whatever they wanted, ignoring any sense of responsibility.
So even after thousands of years, we're still struggling with the same stuff. Why do you think that is?
Well, maybe it's just part of being human, right? We're limited, we're mortal. It's easy to focus on the here and now, the easy pleasures. And it's easy to fool ourselves into thinking we're not doing anything wrong.
It's like we're all experts at self-deception.
That's a great way to put it. But then it makes you wonder, how do we break out of that cycle? How do we live a more, authentic life?
Those are great questions. But I want to switch gears for a second. Thinking about Methuselah's 969 years, it makes our lives seem so short, right?
I know. Makes you think about legacy, doesn't it? Like, what kind of impact can one life really have? Especially when you compare it to Methuselah's epic journey.
Exactly. And I think that's a perfect place to pick up after our next break.
We'll be back to explore Methuselah's legacy and what it might teach us about the power of one life to shape history.
So we've been talking about some pretty intense stuff, wickedness, judgment, even tricking ourselves.
Yeah.
But now I'm kind of curious about the idea of legacy. Like, what mark did Methuselah leave on the world, especially with that crazy long lifespan, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, he wasn't just some random guy living off the grid. He was part of this whole line of, well, kind of important figures.
Right, like his father Enoch, walked with God, the whole deal. And then Noah, his grandson, chosen to, restart humanity after the flood.
It's almost like Methuselah was this link between them, connecting that past with that close relationship with God to the future. The future after the flood changed everything.
It's like he was a bridge between those two worlds.
I like that, a bridge.
Hmm.
And it reminds us that even though Methuselah lived in this super messed up time, his story isn't like a tragedy.
Right. It's not all doom and gloom.
There's hope in there, too. That possibility of a fresh start. And that fresh start, well, it kind of came through his grandson, Noah.
It's like Methuselah, by just living his life, helped make that happen, right? Set the stage for Noah's mission.
Exactly. And it makes me think about how our lives are all connected, Even ordinary people can have a part in something huge.
We might not see the full impact, right? But it's there, rippling out.
Just like Methuselah, we're all part of something way bigger.
Kind of like standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Noah on Methuselah's shoulders, Methuselah on Enoch's.
And it's not just about, family, right? It's about the stuff we pass down. Values, beliefs, a way of life.
Right. So what would Methuselah say about legacy, I wonder? If we could ask him today.
Maybe he'd say it's not about, being famous or doing big, splashy things. Maybe it's about those small choices we make every day.
The way we treat people. The things we care about.
Right, because even little stuff can make a difference, right? It all adds up.
Like that butterfly effect thing.
Totally. And I bet Methuselah, with all those years, he'd totally get that. He saw how things change, how even small actions can have big results, good or bad.
It's kind of humbling, right? To think that our lives, they do matter, even when the world feels like it's going crazy.
Yeah, we can make a difference. Leave things better than we found them.
That's a good thought. A good takeaway from Methuselah's story.
I think so. And I think it's pretty amazing how these old stories can still hit us like that, thousands of years later, make us think about our own lives,
They really do. I feel like we've just scratched the surface with Methuselah. So much to think about.
Totally. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for our deep dive today.
Wow, this one flew by. We covered a lot, huh? From his 969 years, his family, that name, to the crazy world he lived in. We even talked about how things back then, well, they kind of rhyme with today.
It's true. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that these stories, they're not just about the past. They're about us, too. About how we live, what we value, the legacy we'll leave behind.
Well said. So to all our listeners out there, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive as much as we did.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions. These old stories have so much to teach us if we're willing to listen.
Until next time, everyone, happy exploring.